Hello and welcome to Lecture 4 the OGSM. This is the graphical representation of what I plan to cover in the module, and as you'll be aware, we've covered what is marketing, what is strategy, and what is the value proposition. We've touched on the approach to marketing and marketing strategy that I call brand management, and today we will deal with the OGSM. This is important because the OGSM is one of the in-module assignments that I require you to do as part of this module. Details on what's involved, timelines, etc. will be at the end of this video. So, what is the OGSM? It's a framework for formulating and communicating strategy. It's a framework that helps you think strategically. It's, I believe, a very effective tool for teaching people to think strategically. We've seen a bit of that in last week's lecture, and hopefully today we'll see a bit more of that. When it's widely understood across an organization, the OGSM is a very effective tool for communicating strategy. It gets everybody pointed in the same direction. So not only is it good at formulating strategy, helping you to think strategically as an individual, it helps organizations to follow strategy and organizations themselves to think strategically. It was invented in the 80s by Japanese car companies and later picked up by Procter & Gamble. And Procter & Gamble is the organization that is really responsible for spreading the OGSM message across the world. And what you tend to have is ex-P&G managers going into other organizations and bringing this tool with them. However, there's nothing, as I said in the first lecture, there's nothing formal available, I guess maybe beyond this lecture, that teaches you how to do the OGSM. So it's something that's very important to bear in mind should you go looking elsewhere for some stuff. I've said before, this book is as close as you'll probably get to something that's usable, that's published. Otherwise, stick to the material that I'm providing. The letters stand for objective, goals, strategies, and measures. And both the objective and the strategies are the hard to understand part. They're a little conceptually difficult. The goals and the measures, the G and the M, support the O and the S. So the way we're going to talk about this is really get an understanding of the O and the S, and then the G and M sections will fall into place. So the strategy process and practice, we touched on this last week. Strategy is fundamentally about achieving objectives. You consider the resources, opportunities that you have, make choices about those. The trade-off between resources and choices is an iterative process. You will keep moving back and forth until you're comfortable with the choices and strategies that you will choose to pursue. Execution is a key part of strategy because none of it can come to life unless it's executed and executed well. There are 5 steps to the OGSM, and we will cover each of these in turn. The first step is assess the landscape. To illustrate this, consider the situation where you've been parachuted into somewhere. You don't know where it is, so you don't yet know what to do. There are steps you would take before you would make decisions about the actions you would take. You would consider what's around you, look at the horizon, look for signs of civilization, look at the vegetation, what part of the world are you in? Essentially, you'd assess the landscape. And that's the first step in creating an OGSM before making a strategic plan, is to understand where you are. It's important to build a realistic assessment of where you are. The better the assessment you make, the better the analysis you do at this assessing the landscape stage, the better the strategies that you formulate will be to progress from that position. Good strategy depends on good and realistic assessment of the landscape. To illustrate how this should not be done, I'm going to show you a clip from the HBO series Chernobyl. And I'm going to show you this clip because the situation that's portrayed here is actually remarkably common within the business world. No, I don't mean nuclear reactors exploding, but I do mean a refusal to understand the situation that people are in. Taking factors that are less important or even irrelevant to the situation and giving them too much of a priority when trying to make these assessments in order to, again, progress. Now, unfortunately, this situation is remarkably common. I've experienced it myself, and I don't have a solution. What I do want you to get from this is to recognize it within organizations, and in particular within your own landscape assessment as part of any kind of strategic planning.
Panel, I need water in my reactor core. What does the decimeter say? 3.6 Rontgen, but that's as high as the meter. 3.6. Not great or terrible. Could do this, definitely. Scott. Did you lower the control rods or not? Take him to the infirmary.
I need a medic! Anyone?
He's delusional.
His face.
Ruptured condenser lines. The feed water is mildly contaminated. He'll be fine. I've seen worse. We have the situation under control.
Under control?
I have to tell the Central Committee about this. Do you realise that? What about radiation?
Obviously down here is nothing but in the reactor building. I'm being told 3.6 Rontgen per hour.
Well, that's not great, but it's not horrifying.
Not at all. From the feed water, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
First, the accident is well under control. It is important that we ensure that this incident has no adverse consequences.
The air is glowing.
The Cherenkov effect. Completely normal phenomenon, can happen with minimal radiation.
Well,
200 Rontgen.
it's another faulty meter. You're wasting our time.
I checked the meter against the control.
What's wrong with you? How'd you get that number from feed water leaking from a blown tank?
You don't?
And what are you talking about?
I think there's graphite on the ground in the rubble.
You didn't see graphite.
I did.
You didn't. You didn't! Because it's not there!
What? Are you suggesting the core... what? Exploded?
I apologise.
So what we see there is a situation where there's an absolute refusal to accept reality, and therefore no strategies can be formulated, no decisions can be made. Something to bear in mind. We'll start with how not to do it. Moving on to a more positive approach to assessing the landscape. I have here a schematic from Dolan's note on marketing strategy. Again, this is the older one, the one that was written in 2000, and it's something we've discussed in previous lectures. I want to focus on the 5 C's: customers, company, competitors, collaborators, and context. And these are things to consider as you do this marketing analysis, as you do this landscape analysis. Understand each of these points. What decisions, what choices will we make about customer needs? Which benefits will we focus on? What type of value proposition will we have? Which customer segments will we target? Equally, competition. Is there a competitor, one competitor that we must stay ahead of in order to be successful? Collaborators are, for example, retailers that you would sell through if you have that kind of distribution chain. Each of these are also considerations for the strategy part of the OGSM. They're relevant in assessing the landscape, and they're relevant in the strategy section as well. Much the same as Porter's generic strategies are. Cost leadership, differentiation, we've talked about these at length previously, but the assessing the landscape decision deals a lot with understanding your positioning, understanding your position relative to the 5 C's, relative to the marketplace, and what choices you have there. The assessing the landscape will drive problem definition to create objectives, and strategic choices that you also need to pursue. So all of this is going to start to come together in a minute, but positioning will dictate the direction that you're going to go in for the OGSM, so it's an important consideration as well. This is a graphic of Porter's 5 forces, and again, other things to consider. These 5 forces coming from Porter deal specifically with positioning. Positioning will give you an assessment of where you stand of the landscape in which you play, and would also help drive objectives and strategies into the future. So this should all be coming together. Here's an example of strategy leading from a positioning assessment. We've got Walmart, the biggest grocery retailer in the world, who have a real dominant position in US grocery. 25% of US grocery is today sold through Walmart. They're the logistics king with the muscle to be the best on price. A real stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap, old school type retailer. And their value proposition or their positioning is around price and mass quantities. Into that environment comes another grocery retailer, our general goods retailer called Target, and they have a great store experience with a product that is exciting and unique. It's a much friendlier type equity positioning that they try and approach consumers with. And their strategy then to try and react to this behemoth of a competitor that is Walmart is around innovation, design, and quality. Strategy leading from a positioning assessment. If Walmart go left, they need to go right. If Walmart zig, they need to sag, because they can't take them on head on. They need to find differentiation. We've learned that differentiation is fundamental to positioning, or to good positioning. Good assessing the landscape assessment helps identify the core problem. When I talked last week about strategic thinking, one of the arts involved in strategic thinking is really understanding what the core problem is. Here we've detailed in an excerpt from Lafley and Martin this identification of what the core strategic problem is, what your objective will center on in the OGSM. I'm not going to read these out individually. These are something that you can refer back to when you are constructing OGSMs, when you're considering strategy. So a bit like the 5 C's, these are areas and problems identified within them that are useful reference points in constructing strategies and identifying what an objective would be. Having done the landscape assessment, we move on to the O and the G within the OGSM. Objective. An objective is what you ultimately want to achieve. In identifying what this is, we've talked about landscape assessment, problem identification. Even if you know the problem, an objective is a solution to that problem. And there's a process, a bit like making choices about strategies, about resources in order to formulate strategies. With objectives, you need to repeatedly ask the question, where will that get us? For example, an OGSM from Gillette disposable razors in Western Europe. And the objective there was to be the engine of growth for the entire Gillette business. It wasn't, let's sell more. It wasn't, let's sell 10% of overall sales. It was to be growing significantly enough to be able to drive the whole Gillette business forward, to have that position. So where will that get us? What kind of situation will that get us into? And that came as a result of repeatedly ask the question, where will that get us? So what role will it give to us when we're in that situation, when we've achieved that objective? Clarity here drives the rest of the OGSM. If you don't get your objective right, nothing else is going to be correct, because you're not able to build strategies for an incorrect objective. It should be worded as a statement, and this is one of the key process parts of the OGSM. It goes words, numbers. So O and S are words, and then the G and the M are numbers in order to support that word aspect. Objectives should be breakthrough, specific, and actually possible. Again, thinking of the Chernobyl case, a realistic assessment of where you are. The objective needs to be possible, or everything you're doing is in vain. It's easy to get into the weeds here. Sometimes the objective just can be really simple. It doesn't have to be, like in the Gillette example, we'll be the engine of growth for this entire business. It could just be launch the flipping thing. We're building an OGSM for a product launch, and we just need to get it out the door. The way I've described this is a nice articulation of what an aspirational objective would be, but sometimes you've just got to get on with it, so it's something to bear in mind. Goals, the second part of the OGSM. Now, these should be numeric or binary articulations of the objective. And what I mean by binary is it's something that's either on or it's off. It has happened or it hasn't. For example, launch by a particular date. If you don't launch on that date, it's off. You failed to meet that goal. So in this case, in goals, there should be a number, grow by 10%, grow a specific area by 20%, or hit a date, hit a benchmark that you're either on or off. It's either happened or it hasn't, so that you can look at this objectively to understand whether or not you've met that goal. Goals should clarify the objective, so they come together, the O and G come together. They also come together in the sense that they should be stepping stones to achieve the objective. In a broad sense, the goal should add up to the objective. And I say multiple, about 3, it doesn't have to be, but 3 is comfortable. And then it should be SMAC, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, and compatible. So the O and the G are the what part of the OGSM. Now this is distinct from the who, what, how within the brand building framework, which we'll get to. But this is what we're about in the OGSM. Objectives, goals. The objective is a breakthrough achievement in words, and the goals are stepping stones to achieving that objective, binary or numeric. Here's a very simple example. An OGSM to improve my golf game. So the objective is to become the most improved golfer in my club. Notice it's not reduce my handicap by 6 strokes or something else. It's the position that this player will get to when she's achieved the OGSM or follows the strategies within the OGSM. So the goals, the stepping stones to achieve that, if these are true, the objective will be true. Reduce average score per round by 10 strokes to a new numeric version, then get into the top 30 in the club rankings. So binary, you're either in the top 30 or you're not. The S and the M, strategies, how we plan to achieve our objectives in the simplest form. Now this is in the context of the OGSM. We defined strategies last week. I'll touch on it again very briefly here. And these are sometimes split into where to play and how to win. We came across where to play with Porter last week, a positioning strategy. And if it's comfortable or it makes it easier for you to break these strategies into where to play and how to win, that's great, do it. But if it just confuses it for you, just ignore it. Again, you need some flexibility to approach this. In the same way I talked about the watch out with objectives, sometimes you just got to launch the product, you just got to get it out the door. Equally, where to play and how to win are perspectives or even tools that should facilitate you creating strategies, and if they don't, just ignore them. The next few slides are going to cover other things that you can take or leave, but these are useful checklists to go through to understand what strategies are in order to create them to make better OGSMs. Before that though, again, as I said briefly, strategies are effectiveness in achieving objectives, the really quick rule of thumb. A longer version is choices that position the firm and effectively use its resources, capabilities and or opportunities to achieve objectives. Now this is already starting with these checklists of things you can, if it's useful, consider. Resources, capabilities or skills, opportunities, positions resulting from the assessing the landscape assessment. So key considerations in strategic choices. This is a slide from last week. We talked about independence already today. We talked about it last week. We talked about a right to win and this idea of it's realistic. And the key thing I want to really pull out here is this idea of, would you choose not to do it? If you remember, the example from last week was execute with excellence. Would you choose to execute badly? No. So execute with excellence in most cases is not a strategic choice. And this choice, would you choose not to do it, actually again comes from Porter. So a lot of strategy, as much as a lot of this presentation, relies on the thinking of Michael Porter. Strategy requires you to make trade-offs, to choose what not to do. Some competitive activities are incompatible, thus gains in one area can be achieved only at the expense of other areas. If we do X, we're not able to do Y. We can't be soft and hard at the same time. You'll remember O'Leary and the example that I went through with Ryanair from last week. Now here's one of these tips that you can use. By staying focused, you are making an inherent choice. You're choosing, if you're focusing in one area, you're not focusing in another. You're making a priority call. So arguably, in OGSMs, if every single strategy started with the word focus on X, focus on Y, focus on this geography, focus on this competitor, this consumer segment, this benefit, every single sentence could start with focus and it would probably be a strategy. It'd be a pretty boring OGSM, but it would probably fulfill the criteria of this process. So the first tip I have for anybody constructing an OGSM is consider that, are you focusing? Because in the same way you're considering Porter's test of strategy, would we choose not to do it? These are considerations from Playing to Win, the course text. I'm not going to read through them now. They're here, they're obviously in the book. These are things, again, as I said, I'm going to give you checklists to consider when you're trying to formulate strategies in building OGSMs. 2 fundamental ways to win. This goes back to Porter. This is from Lafley and Martin. They talk about this low-cost strategy or differentiation strategy. What I want you to take from this is, if you're looking at a low-cost strategy, there's a list here of strategies that you could pursue when building an OGSM. Equally, if you're choosing a differentiation strategy, a more marketing-oriented strategy, look at these potential strategies. These are something that you can quite easily fit into most OGSMs depending on which one of these 2 routes that you would take. The value equation, another consideration. Are we strong on price? Good. Are we strong on brand equity? Well, maybe not. Are we strong on product performance? And that mix is what creates consumer value. So again, it's not about mathematical numbers, it's about relationships and understanding where we're strong as a brand and where we're not, what we need to focus on, what we need to maintain competitiveness with. Another consideration. These are brand managers' business metrics. They come from a guy called John Pepper, or they're based on some work by a guy called John Pepper, who, as it happens, was a former CEO of Procter & Gamble. But when he was CEO, he used to fly around the world analysing businesses. There'd be big PowerPoint presentations, all day long meetings, and he'd go through some simple criteria to understand how a business was doing. So things like volume and value shares, are they growing? Is share growing essentially? The split between volume and value we'll talk about in week 11. Are profit margins on target or on the way to being on target? Is the brand the innovation leader within the category? Are we growing trial or penetration? Are we growing loyalty? And both of these. I got a question during the week about loyalty, and I said we will discuss it again in the future. In this case, you're looking at both trial and loyalty. There's a big debate within marketing about whether you should just focus on one or the other. For us, for now, we're going to talk about both. Do channels want to support the brand? Do your retailers, the people who sell your product, want to support the brand? Now, that's not always the case with certain brands, within certain marketing organizations, so it depends. But you could also talk about, are you facilitating your salespeople? Are you making their life easier? Are you making it so that they can do their job effectively? How are we progressing against our number 1 strategy? And then this idea of return on investment, which often is as it is here, the last thing on the list, and sometimes people don't get to it. So again, more considerations to think about as you're building OGSMs. Measures, the M in the OGSM. They should be numeric again. So we talked about words, numbers. We're on a numbers column now. SMACs, specific, measurable, achievable, compatible. And another key tip to implementing strategy. There is a truth in business that if you give a job to 2 people, nobody will do it. You need a single person to be responsible for each measure so that they will make sure it gets done. Now, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I describe this person as a SWN, or single ringable neck. It's an important idea, and it's something that makes strategy happen. It's a key principle of execution, at least a key practical principle of execution in my experience. We've got the what of OGSMs and the how of OGSMs, working through the words, binary or numbers, words, and numbers idea. Statement of the breakthrough you want to achieve, addressing the problem you've identified in the assessing the landscape step. Quantitative targets are milestones or stepping stones to achieving that objective. the how of achieving objectives, strategy. Now, not obviously a full definition of strategy, but it serves our purposes for the OGSM, and then numeric targets of progress on those strategies. An overview of the OGSM, applying it to the simple golf example. We've talked about objectives and goals. So here we have the strategies. Focus. Here we go. Focus on improving putting. The one thing that's going to make the most difference to my game, and that's something that's well known in golf. Putting is where you lose all your strokes. Play more often. It's quite a simple strategy, but it's important. Get coaching, and then play with better players. Each measure deals specifically with the strategy. So focus on improving putting, reduce the average number of putts per hole to 2. Play more often, 1 round, 1 practice, 1 coach. So 3 times a week, including, as you can see there, this one measure actually covers 2 strategies. And then what kind of playing partner defines better players. Watch outs. Trying to do everything, not prioritizing, not making choices. Probably the most common thing. Typically, this comes along with what is one of my most hated words in business, which is agility. People excuse their lack of ability to prioritize by suggesting people can't do multiple things because they can't be agile, when in fact, we need as strategists to be decisive, to prioritize, to make choices. Overcomplication, too much time strategizing. This reflects the watch out that I had with objectives. Sometimes just launch the thing is all you need to do. You can spend forever crafting these messages and not really getting you any further. I would suggest that if you're struggling with the wordsmithing of objectives or even strategies, you write down what's simplest and then come back and fix it later. Keep progressing, because as part of this iteration process, you will discover exactly what you're trying to do. So move on, move back, complete that iteration process. Don't spend too much time trying to perfect every single step before you move on. And that will help you create better OGSMs and create those OGSMs more quickly. Flexibility touches on the same sort of ideas I've just described. Not following the words, numbers process. It is important that you do that, otherwise you'll end up with too many words, or you'll end up with a numeric objective which doesn't release the kind of strategic choices that you would like to have in order to have successful and solid OGSMs. Inappropriate goals and performance measures, like too short time horizons, like we need to be agile, we need to do this more quickly than we can possibly do it. This doesn't help, and in fact it just costs more time in the medium to long term. And then this is don't be stupid, basically, the last one. Your numbers need to add up to the desired result. Often we'll talk about in a marketing context, and we're going to grow volume share by X amount and our revenue will grow by X amount. But the amount of volume you sell at the price you're going to sell it needs to add up to the same number as the revenue, otherwise it just doesn't make any sense. So it all needs to fit together. So here's an example. This is from page 140 in the Lafley and Martin book. It's an OGSM for Bounty kitchen towels. In this case, they've got 2 objectives. Good for them. The process and the criteria that I talked about flows through from this. So they use the where to play, how to win breakdown in terms of strategies. Win in North America, they talk about geographies, the positioning element of where to play. They talk about growing the margin of leadership. So this isn't perfect. What does that mean? Arguably, the as far ahead they are in share, they would like to grow that share to a greater extent. I would like this to be articulated more clearly. So not everything is perfect here. Win in supermarkets and mass discount channels. So they're considering the channels in which they operate through. So if you remember the 5 C's, here they are coming to life. And how to win, it's less about positioning and more about be lean. Okay, so spend less money. Be the choice of consumers. Having identified consumer needs, what needs are they going to focus on? Again, I would like to see what specific benefit they would like to focus on articulated here. It may be the case that they didn't want to reveal some of the consumer research that they had done, and that's why it's not included here. Something else I want to highlight here is you see in measures, operating TSR stands for total shareholder return progress. If there's terms in these examples that you don't understand, don't worry about it. They refer to TSR somewhere else. It's something that's important. The OGSM fits together in terms of these things, that where goals are being referred to again in the measures. So all this adds up to the same thing. What we need to get from this at this stage is the flow of the OGSM. Anything that's not clear like that, that's sort of a technical reference, it doesn't matter, because it shouldn't affect how you understand this OGSM or how the OGSM would be understood. Call it sales. So for summary, again, an overview of the process, objective, leading to choices, and execution, making it happen. The 5 steps of the OGSM. Now I'll spend a little longer on it this time because we've gone through them. So assess the landscape, understand the context you're in, and identify the core problem. Decide what you ultimately want to achieve, or how will you overcome that core problem that you've identified in step 1. Define milestones to that objective and express in a binary or numeric form. They're your goals. How to do it, the how of achieving objectives, these are your strategies. And then KPIs or measures that clarify and signify success for those strategies. This could go on to execution and so on, but today we're going to focus on the writing of OGSMs, and these are the 5 steps involved. Within the Lafley and Martin book, he takes a similar approach. I said before, this book is basically about the OGSM. They don't call it the OGSM, but it moves in a very similar direction. And these steps are very similar to the 5 steps that I've articulated with regard to OGSM. In this case, they use questions to articulate those steps. What is our winning aspiration? Our objective? Strategies? Where do we play? How will we win? What capabilities must we have? What this is about is, do we need to build capabilities in order that we can implement the strategies? Now, I don't take that approach with regard to the OGSM. I look at capabilities or skills that we have as a resource that we would allocate or focus on within our strategic choices. And then management systems, similar to those capabilities, they question what needs to be built. I take a more static view on it in terms of what already exists, and therefore what strategies could we decide upon as a result. It may be the case that our strategy is to build a capability or build a management system, but they're different. Here it's an inherent within it. For me, it's a specific strategic choice to go and do those 2 things. Reading for this week, chapters 2 and 6, in particular, pages 139 to 141. This is where the OGSM and Playing to Win come together, and they go through briefly what an OGSM is, and the example I've given previously in this presentation is detailed there. Also, you may have already seen this, but the OGSM in 5 minutes is available at ogsm.tv. Your assignment: I want you to write an OGSM for a brand of your choice. The process that I want you to follow is pick an area that requires some strategic planning. For example, a brand launch like the challenger banks that I mentioned in week 1, Revolut, Monzo, Starling. Some of them are in Ireland. They're all in the UK. They're all available. They're all online banks, so all the information is available online that you would need to access to understand the landscape and build a strategic plan. A new product launch like Benecol muesli bars. Benecol is a brand that helps lower cholesterol. It's in the dairy aisle. They tend to be drinks, often some other dairy products, but they've launched muesli bars. That may be something that you would write about. Or, for example, a market leader needing to maintain that position. Coca-Cola, Volkswagen are examples of this. So a broad area, find a brand, and you can use these if you want, that has a problem to be solved that you would build an OGSM around. Define an objective that fits with the strategic problem that you've identified, which is what you've based your brand choice on. For example, establish a viable business or brand. This is the challenger banks. There's loads of them out there. Who's going to survive? How are they going to do that? Or, as I said before, just launch the product. Muesli bars are an example of that. We just need to get it out the door, establish it in the marketplace. So what does that mean? Would it need a minimum share to exist? Now, you don't know what a minimum share for muesli bars is, neither do I. So create one, make it up, 10%. It doesn't actually matter. What matters is the thought process that we go through, not the specific numbers. And I'm going to address that a little bit more on just the next point. I want you to make strategic choices and outline strategies around at least the areas we've already covered. Or you may, in Lafley and Martin, find some more. You may have some experience from other marketing lectures. It's not fundamentally important. I don't want to assess you on your marketing ability. I will come later. I want to assess you on, can you follow the process that I've outlined in creating OGSM and in defining strategies. We've covered value propositions, we've covered the 5 C's, that's plenty. There are other examples from Bounty previously in this presentation. What's covered there is fine. It's not that important how much marketing you put into this. We need a context, and we have it within marketing or a brand launch or something similar. What I want to see is, have you understood what we've talked about in terms of thinking strategically, defining strategies, writing OGSMs? Ensure that the OGSM is a coherent whole. Strategies actually achieve the objectives, look like they would achieve the objectives, plausibly could achieve the objective. Goals and measures clarify and they add up to the objectives and strategies. It comes together. Again, I'm assessing your understanding of the framework and process of the OGSM, not whether you can come up with viable strategies nor brilliant marketing. Again, I don't need you to be strategy experts. I don't need you to be marketing experts. I need you to follow the process and show me you've understood what we've covered so far. Fundamentally, what I'm trying to do here is give you the practice, and then I will feed back to you on your OGSM. I understand it'll be your first OGSM. So again, I don't need marketing expertise. I don't even need strategy expertise. I just need you to reflect what we've gone through so far so I get a feel for how much you have learned and to help and enable your learning. Again, the tool helps you think strategically. Following this process will in and of itself help you think strategically. You will be a better strategist as a result of writing an OGSM. So we're getting some practice in now. It's a very small percentage of the overall score, and I'm not going to be too hard on it. Don't expect industry standard OGSMs at your first attempt. If I get them, I'll be very impressed, but I don't expect that at this stage. Use Lafley and Martin if you need some more information. Obviously, use this video and the previous one from last week. The way you get them to me is you submit them to this email address, my UCD email address, by 5 p.m. on Friday, 30th of October, which gives you just over 2 weeks. This should be on one page. An OGSM should be on one page, one A4 page. Golf one, if you get the thinking right, one with the amount of words in it that's in the golf one will be fine. But bear in mind, you need to get the thinking right to be able to do something as short as that. And that might be more difficult in and of itself. I'll talk more about this in the Zoom session, and we can talk in the forum during the week. Thank you very much.